My family called me a beggar in front of 200 guests. Little did they know, I owned the entire celebration they were bragging about. I hadn't been home in years. After my father died, I left town and built my own life far away from the people who once made me feel like nothing. Now, in my early 30s, I'd learned to live quietly and work hard. When I got the invitation to my cousin Evelyn's engagement party, I almost threw it away. But something in me wanted to see them again, to face them one last time. That night, I walked into the ballroom wearing a simple blue dress and carrying a small purse. The place sparkled with gold lights, soft music, and the sound of people showing off their wealth. My family always loved being the center of attention. I stayed near the back, hoping to just blend in. But the moment Evelyn saw me, the room went silent. "Oh my God," she said loudly, her voice dripping with fake surprise. "You actually came." Heads turned toward me. My Aunt Clara gave me that same cold smile I remembered from my childhood. "Hazel," she said smoothly, "how brave of you to show up." People began whispering behind their glasses. I smiled politely and greeted a few faces I barely remembered. But then Evelyn laughed. "Did you walk here, or did someone finally lend you a car?" she said, her voice carrying across the room. A few guests chuckled. "You know," she added, "Hazel's always been our family charity case." The laughter hurt, but I didn't let it show. I'd spent too many years building myself from the ground up to let their words shake me now. I kept my smile, but inside, I felt the old sting of every insult, every time they told me I'd never make it. I looked around the ballroom, the chandeliers, the flowers, the elegant marble floor, and I almost laughed. They didn't know I had designed this place. Every light, every detail, every staff member, they all worked for me. The company that owned this venue, the catering, even the decorations, all belonged to me under a different name. I stood there quietly as they whispered and mocked, feeling a strange peace wash over me. They thought I was still the poor girl they'd thrown away. They had no idea that I was the one who owned the very ground beneath their feet. I didn't need to say a word. The time for that would come soon enough. I grew up in the Quinn family estate, a huge house filled with expensive furniture, quiet halls, and cold hearts. My family had old money and old rules. They believed that wealth decided worth, and anyone who didn't fit their idea of class didn't belong. My father, Marcus Quinn, had been the only one different from them. He was kind, warm, and never cared about status. When he married my mother, June, a waitress at a small diner in town, the family turned on him. They told him he had ruined the Quinn name. My Aunt Clara, who loved control more than people, made sure everyone knew he was no longer welcome. Still, my parents were happy in our little home outside the estate. We didn't have much, but we had peace. My father always told me, "Hazel, don't let anyone tell you your worth. You'll build your own someday." When I was 12, everything changed. My father got sick. He died within a few months, leaving my mother and me heartbroken and alone. I remember the day after his funeral. My Aunt Clara came to our door in her long black coat, her lips pressed tight as if she was already bored of grief. She handed my mother an envelope and said, "This is all that's left. The rest belongs to the family." Inside were a few papers and a small check that barely covered the funeral costs. When my mother asked about Dad's belongings, Clara sighed, annoyed, and told us to come by the estate to collect them. We went the next day. The house looked even bigger than I remembered. Everything was clean, polished, and silent. Clara met us at the front door with a box in her hands. "Take your trash and go," she said coldly, pushing the box toward me. I didn't cry then, even though my mother did. I just stood there, staring at the woman who had taken everything from us without blinking. In that box were my father's watch, some letters, and a few photos. I held it tight and turned away without saying a word. That was the moment I understood what family really meant to them: money, name, and control. Love had no place there. That night, I sat on the floor beside my mother, watching her cry quietly over his things. I felt something burn inside me. I promised myself that one day, I would have more than they ever dreamed of, not to show off, but to prove I could. I didn't know how or when, but I knew I'd never beg them for anything. From that day, the Quinn estate wasn't my home anymore. It became the memory that fueled me. Every cruel word, every door they closed, every time they called us nothing. It all became the reason I would build my life my own way, no matter how long it took. After leaving my hometown, I worked wherever I could. In my 20s, I took every job that came my way, waiting tables, cleaning offices at night, answering phones in small companies. I never complained. Every dollar I earned, I saved. I lived simply, renting a tiny apartment and buying only what I needed. While others my age spent their weekends out having fun, I spent mine reading books about business, real estate, and finance. I wanted to learn how money really worked, not just how to earn it. I didn't have anyone to help me, but I had patience. I watched people, studied their mistakes, and planned quietly. The first big step came when I got a job as an assistant in a property management company. I handled rent payments, contracts, and maintenance calls. It wasn't glamorous, but I learned how buildings made money. I understood how the smallest decisions, like where to buy or when to sell, could change everything. One afternoon, while organizing files, I met Daniel Ross. He was one of the company's older clients, a man who owned several small buildings around the city. He noticed my focus and asked questions about my work. A few weeks later, he offered me a part-time job helping him manage his properties. Daniel was strict but fair. He became my first real mentor. He taught me about buying land, reading markets, and negotiating deals. "Don't chase fast money," he used to say. "Build something that lasts." I listened to every word. With his guidance, I learned how to spot good investments before others did. I started buying small properties using the savings I had, fixing them, and renting them out. It was slow, but each year, I earned a little more. Daniel trusted me enough to bring me into bigger projects, restaurants, event halls, and commercial spaces. By then, I had learned how to create companies and manage them quietly. I didn't want people to know my name. I wanted control, not attention. So, I started a company under the name Quinn Holdings. I used that name for every deal, every contract, every property I owned. To the public, it was just another growing business. To me, it was freedom. By the time I turned 29, I owned several venues, catering services, and event companies, all under that one hidden name. No one knew the woman behind it. I had enough money to live comfortably, but I still lived modestly. I wasn't interested in showing off. I didn't need anyone's approval or praise. Sometimes I'd think about my family and how they once called me worthless. But instead of anger, I felt calm. They had taught me what not to be. I didn't need their world anymore. I had built my own, brick by brick, in silence. One morning, while I was going through some business letters, I noticed a white envelope that looked different from the rest. The paper was thick and smooth, the kind used for fancy events. My name, written in gold ink, caught my eye. When I opened it, I froze. It was an invitation to Evelyn Quinn's engagement celebration. I hadn't seen or heard from my cousin in years, and suddenly, she was inviting me to the biggest event of her life. I almost laughed. The Quinn family never sent me anything unless they wanted to show off. Still, I kept reading. The invitation listed the date, time, and venue. When I saw the name of the place, I felt a strange jolt run through me. It was one of my own properties, one of the ballrooms I owned through my company, Quinn Holdings. For a moment, I thought it must be a mistake. I grabbed my phone and called Mark, my business manager. "Check this for me," I said. "Has the Quinn family booked our downtown ballroom for an event?" He typed for a minute, then answered. "Yes, they booked it months ago through our event partner. Big party. Looks like they paid the deposit already." I couldn't help but smile. Of all the places they could have chosen, they had picked mine. They had no idea that the woman they once mocked now owned the very space where they planned to celebrate their wealth. I leaned back in my chair, the invitation still in my hand. At first, I thought about ignoring it. Part of me didn't want to see their faces again or hear their fake greetings. But another part of me, stronger and calmer, wanted to go. Not to prove anything, not to show off, but to finally see them without the weight of shame I once carried. I wanted to walk into that room knowing the truth they didn't. I placed the invitation on my desk and looked out the window. The city I had built my life in spread out before me. My buildings, my work, my quiet victories. I thought about my father and how proud he would have been to see this moment. The family that had thrown us away was about to celebrate inside my walls, under my lights, served by my staff. I told Mark to make sure everything for that night went smoothly. "Treat it like any other event," I said. He asked if I'd be attending, and I answered, "Yes. I think it's time." When I hung up, I felt calm. This wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about closing a door that had been open for too long. I decided then that I would go to the party, not as the girl they once pitted, but as the woman who no longer needed their approval. The evening of the engagement party arrived faster than I expected. I took my time getting ready, choosing a plain black dress that fit well but didn't stand out. No expensive jewelry, no designer shoes, just simple and clean. I tied my hair back and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't want to walk in looking like someone who needed attention. I wanted to disappear into the crowd, to see them without being truly seen. When I arrived, the parking lot was already full of expensive cars. The ballroom glowed with soft golden light, and I could hear music and laughter spilling out from inside. For a second, I felt the same nervousness I used to feel as a child walking into one of their parties. But then I took a breath and reminded myself that this was my place. I owned every inch of it, even if they didn't know it yet. As I stepped inside, the room grew quiet for a moment. I could feel people's eyes turning toward me, trying to place my face. My Aunt Clara blinked, then frowned slightly, as if she couldn't quite believe I had shown up. Evelyn noticed me next. Her red lips curved into a smirk. "Well," she said loudly enough for people nearby to hear, "look who finally came back. Everyone, this is our cousin Hazel, the one who decided she didn't need our help but never quite made it on her own." Some people laughed politely. Others just smiled awkwardly and turned away. I gave a small nod, pretending not to notice the insult. My aunt's friends whispered behind their glasses of champagne, one of them murmuring, "She looks so tired." I didn't react. I had learned long ago that silence often stings more than words. I greeted them all with calm politeness, my voice soft but steady. I moved slowly through the room, pretending to admire the flowers and decorations, but in truth, I was checking everything: the setup, the service, the staff uniforms. Everything looked perfect. My company had done its job well. The catering tables were filled with dishes from one of my restaurants. The waiters moved with practiced grace, trained under my own team. No one had the faintest idea. I smiled as Evelyn bragged about how much effort she and her mother had put into finding the perfect venue. I said nothing, just nodded kindly, letting her believe she had outdone herself. All around me, laughter and music filled the air, but I felt oddly peaceful. They thought I was the same quiet girl they could laugh at, the one who didn't belong. They had no clue that everything they were proud of tonight, the food, the flowers, the shining floor under their feet, was mine. As I stood there, pretending to blend in, I felt something steady grow inside me. It wasn't anger anymore, it was control. I didn't need to shout, argue, or prove anything. My revenge had already started the moment I walked through those doors. The evening went on with music, laughter, and endless small talk. I stayed near the edge of the crowd, quietly watching everyone enjoy themselves. The speeches began after dinner. Evelyn's fiancé spoke first, thanking everyone for coming. Then my Aunt Clara gave a long, proud toast about family success and the Quinn legacy. I listened silently, my hands folded in my lap. Then Evelyn stood up, holding her champagne glass. Her voice was loud and cheerful at first. She talked about love and happiness, and people clapped and smiled. But then her tone changed. She looked straight at me, her lips curling into that familiar cruel smile. "And I just want to say," she said sweetly, "I hope our dear cousin Hazel finds a man who'll buy her dinner one day. She deserves at least that much." Laughter spread through the room. It wasn't a loud kind of laugh, but it was enough. Enough to make my chest tighten and my throat burn. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, waiting to see my reaction. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, my glass in my hand, pretending to smile. Inside, my heart pounded, but not from pain, from restraint. I wouldn't give them the show they wanted. Evelyn kept talking, her words floating over the laughter like poison wrapped in sugar. I looked around the ballroom, at the golden lights shining on the faces of people who thought they knew who I was. None of them had a clue. I focused on the sound of the music instead, letting it drown out the laughter. A few minutes later, one of the servers walked by carrying a tray of drinks. His hand shook slightly, and a bit of champagne spilled near my seat. He looked terrified and rushed to apologize. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he said, trying to wipe it up quickly. Before I could answer, Evelyn's voice cut through the air again. "Oh, don't worry," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She's used to cleaning up." That time, the laughter was sharper. Even my aunt smiled behind her glass. Something inside me went cold. I looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, the pride, the cruelty, the way she fed on attention. Then I turned to the young waiter and said softly, "It's all right. It's just a little spill." He nodded, grateful, and hurried away. I sat back, my hands still and calm. The room around me blurred for a moment, but my mind had never been clearer. I realized then that I didn't need to feel hurt anymore. I didn't need to stay quiet out of fear or kindness. In that moment, I made my decision. They had laughed enough. They had treated me like nothing long enough. I would show them who they were mocking, and what real power looked like. When the toasts finally ended, I felt like the air in the room had turned heavy. The laughter still echoed in my ears, but I stayed quiet. I waited for the right moment. When people began to move toward the dessert tables, I quietly slipped out to the balcony. The night air was cool against my face, and for the first time that evening, I could breathe. I took out my phone and dialed a familiar number. My voice was calm when I spoke. "It's me," I said. "We're going to make a small change to the program. Have the manager come in and speak to the hosts. Tell him it's a direct instruction from the owner." There was a short pause on the other end, then a quiet "understood." I stood there for a few minutes, listening to the faint sound of music drifting from inside. I wasn't angry anymore, just steady. Everything that needed to happen was already in motion. I finished my drink, straightened my dress, and walked back into the ballroom. Inside, the crowd was laughing again, clinking glasses, unaware of what was coming. I returned to my seat as if nothing had happened. I picked up another glass of champagne and watched the stage. A few minutes later, the venue manager, a tall man in a dark suit, walked up to the podium. He waited for the music to stop, then spoke politely into the microphone. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," he said with a small smile. "May I please have Miss Evelyn Quinn and Mrs. Clara Quinn join me for a quick matter regarding the event arrangements?" The room went quiet. Evelyn looked confused, then annoyed. "Can this wait?" she asked. "We're in the middle of a party." The manager remained calm. "I'm afraid it's rather urgent, ma'am." People started whispering. My aunt sighed loudly and stood up, her bracelets clinking together. "Fine," she said. "Let's get this over with." Evelyn followed her, her face tight with irritation. I stayed seated, sipping my drink, pretending not to notice the curious glances around me. They followed the manager toward a side room just off the main hall. I could see them through the glass door, standing with their arms crossed, demanding answers. The manager kept his polite smile as he spoke to them. I couldn't hear his words, but I knew exactly what he was saying. He told them that the owner of the venue wanted to discuss a matter of unpaid respect. I imagined Clara's face tightening in confusion, then turning red with anger. "And who," she would demand, "does this owner think they are?" I smiled to myself, taking a slow sip of champagne. The chatter around me grew, people wondering what was going on. I didn't look their way. I just sat there, calm and composed, waiting for the moment they would finally understand who they had been mocking all night. The room grew restless as people began to whisper about what was happening. Evelyn and Clara had been gone for a few minutes, and I knew the manager had told them everything. I stayed in my seat, calm and quiet, pretending to be just another guest waiting for dessert. Then I saw the manager walk back into the ballroom, followed by both of them. Their faces were pale, their confident smiles gone. Evelyn's eyes darted around the room, searching for control she no longer had. Clara's lips were pressed tight, her jaw stiff with anger and disbelief. The music faded as the manager stepped up to the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone polite but firm, "I apologize for interrupting your evening once more, but there's something important we need to share." The chatter stopped. People turned toward the stage, sensing something serious. Evelyn whispered something to her mother, but Clara just shook her head. The manager looked out across the crowd and then gestured toward me. "Please welcome Ms. Hazel Quinn," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the entire room. "Owner of this property and the entire event management group hosting tonight's celebration." The room fell silent. I stood up slowly, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor as I walked forward. I could feel hundreds of eyes following me. For a few long seconds, no one said a word. Then came the gasps. Evelyn's mouth opened slightly, her fake smile frozen in shock. Clara looked at me as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I saw confusion, then realization, and finally shame flicker across her face. All those years of her calling me worthless, all the time she'd told me I'd never make it. Now she was standing in a ballroom that I owned. I took the microphone gently from the manager and turned to face everyone. My voice was calm, steady, and kind. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I said. "It's been a beautiful celebration, and I hope everyone continues to enjoy themselves." I paused for a moment, letting the silence settle again before adding, "From this moment on, the event will continue, at the family's expense this time." There were a few awkward laughs, but most people stayed quiet, unsure of what to do. Evelyn's eyes were wide, and she looked like she wanted to disappear. My aunt tried to speak, but her words caught in her throat. I simply gave a small, polite smile and handed the microphone back to the manager. As I looked around the room, I could feel their embarrassment hanging heavy in the air. Every insult, every cruel word they had ever said to me seemed to echo back at them. I didn't need to shout or gloat. My silence was enough. I walked back to my seat, lifted my glass, and took a slow sip. The music started again, but the mood had changed completely. Their laughter was gone, replaced by the quiet weight of realization. For the first time, they finally saw who I really was. The room stayed quiet after I spoke. People didn't know where to look or what to say. Some guests tried to smile politely, while others whispered behind their glasses. Evelyn and Clara stood frozen near the stage. The light from the chandeliers reflected off their faces, showing every bit of their shock and shame. I could have left right then, but something inside me told me to say one last thing. Not out of anger, but because I needed to close this chapter for good. I walked back to the front of the room and took the microphone again. The crowd turned toward me, waiting. My voice was calm, steady, and clear. "I won't keep you long," I began. "I just want to say thank you. Not for the invitation, but for the lessons." My eyes moved toward my aunt. "Clara, thank you for showing me exactly what I never wanted to become. You taught me that kindness means more than status, and that power without heart is empty." She lowered her eyes, pretending not to hear, but everyone knew the words were meant for her. I turned to Evelyn, who was trying to hold back tears. "And to my cousin," I said softly, "thank you for reminding me that class isn't something money can buy. It's shown in how you treat people when you think they have nothing to give you." There was a faint murmur in the crowd. A few people clapped, unsure if they should. Others stayed silent, uncomfortable. I didn't need their approval. I just wanted the truth to hang in the air, plain and unpolished. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Hazel, please, I didn't mean." I stopped her with a small wave of my hand. "You don't get to rewrite it now," I said quietly. The moments passed. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. My aunt looked furious, but said nothing. I could see her pride cracking, like glass under pressure. The same woman who once told me I'd never be worth anything now stood speechless in a room that belonged to me. I handed the microphone back to the manager and turned toward the doors. My heels echoed on the marble floor as I walked away. No one tried to stop me. People stepped aside to let me pass, their eyes following me with a mix of respect and guilt. At the door, I paused for a second and looked back. The music had stopped again, and my family stood in the middle of the ballroom, unsure what to do next. They looked small, out of place, surrounded by the beauty they once thought they owned. I gave them one last, calm smile and left. The night air outside felt cool and free. Behind me, the lights of the ballroom glowed softly, but the warmth of that world no longer touched me. I walked away knowing that I didn't need their approval or apology. I had already won by becoming someone they could never be. A few days after the party, I went back to my office. The city was calm that morning, sunlight spilling through the tall windows. Everything felt quieter inside me, as if the noise of the past had finally faded. I sat at my desk and opened the folder that held the ownership papers for the ballroom where the engagement had been held. For a while, I just looked at them, remembering everything that had happened there. It wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was peace. The revenge was done, and it had been simple. They had laughed at me in a place that I owned, and that truth had spoken louder than anything I could ever say. Now, I wanted to turn that moment into something good, something that mattered. I called my lawyer and told him what I wanted. "Transfer the property," I said. "All of it." He paused, surprised. "To who?" he asked. "To the nonprofit that supports housing for single mothers," I answered. "Do it quietly. No announcements, no publicity." That organization had helped women like my mother once. Women who worked hard but never got the chances they deserved. I wanted the building to become a place that gave others safety and hope, not just a space for parties and pride. My mother, June, would have loved that. She never cared about money or status. She only wanted a life built on kindness and honesty. When the transfer was complete, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post it online or mention it to friends. It was mine to know, and that was enough. The story began to spread on its own, whispered through town. How the ballroom had been donated by someone who wanted no credit, how the Quinn family had no part in it. People soon connected the pieces. It didn't take long before Clara and Evelyn became the subject of gossip, their pride replaced with embarrassment. I didn't take joy in their downfall. I didn't need to. They had built their lives around appearances, and now those appearances meant nothing. Their names no longer opened doors. People stopped admiring them, stopped inviting them to the same social circles they once ruled. I had taken back what they stole from me years ago, not the money, but the dignity. My own life moved forward quietly. I kept working, buying more properties, growing my company with the same patience that had built it in the first place. I didn't need to be seen or praised. I just wanted to live freely on my own terms. Some nights, I would drive past the old ballroom and see lights glowing inside, families gathering for small community events. It made me smile. I didn't need their approval, and I never had. Everything they once worshipped, the wealth, the power, the name, I had built it from the ground up. But the difference was, I had built it without losing myself. That was my real victory. That was my peace.